Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the webinar Keys to Success for Effective Personalization. We'll be beginning the webinar for the day shortly.
Great, thank you. And welcome everyone to our ongoing series about cracking the code of customer data and identity. It's our ongoing identity series called Mission Possible. Today we'll be talking about the keys to success for effective personalization. For those of you who don't know, I'm Bernie Yu. I head corporate strategy at ADARA. ADARA powers one of the largest data sharing and identity platforms fueled by our global data consortiums to bring insights and intelligence to our customers across the globe. In today's session, we'll be tackling the sometimes complicated world of collecting the right customer data and also organizing it and applying it. Back in 2006, if you recall, The Economist put out an article saying that data is the new oil, and that was a while ago. And they made that analogy because data, like oil, can be refined into many different uses. And today, more than ever, data is a critical driver for fueling personalization strategies across many different industries. So today we'll be diving into that topic with Sarah Welch and Paul Caden. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, great to be here.
Thank you.
We'll be talking about how practitioners need to incorporate the notion of data-driven personalization into the customer journey and what some of the considerations and pitfalls are in execution and deployment. Big topic. So before we dive in, I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please pose those in the chat function on Zoom so that everyone can see the question. And as always, we'll be sending out a recording of the webinar along with any slides that we're presenting as well. So with that, let me give you a little background on Sarah and Paul. Sarah Welch is the Director and Head of Marketing Solutions at Novantas. For those of you who don't know, Novantas is a leading fintech provider that supports banks in driving customer growth with proprietary data and technologies. She brings 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur and marketer in ad tech and digital products. She works closely with marketing executives and product leaders across the financial industry to develop distinctive value propositions, improve marketing analytics, and drive the alignment of cross-bank propositions, improving cross-bank communications around their customers. She's helped build, quantify, and execute tangible, strategic, and tactical programs to improve the efficiency of deposit growth. And a little background around Paul. Paul Caden is managing partner of Resonance, a consulting and advising practice. Paul brings a depth of experience in financial services, client-side experience on financial services, most recently at Citi, where he was head of North America marketing operations and strategy, and head of retail bank marketing as well. Prior to Citi, Paul was EVP division executive at Chase, running the Manhattan and New York City borough divisions, as well as EVP at Dreyfus, in charge of their national network of financial centers. Also an alumni of Novantas, he's led its marketing strategy practice, helping marketers in consumer banking navigate the transformation towards digital and big data technologies. Paul's also held leadership positions at AOL and started his career in the consumer packaged good industries. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
All right, so we've got a wealth of knowledge here to share with the audience, and I wanted to really start out the conversation, wade into the water with both of you. In terms of we're talking about personalization. What do we mean by that? What is personalization exactly? Is it, Sarah? Is it just welcome Sarah to being a customer of my bank today, or what does it really mean to folks?
Yeah, it is a massive topic that I think kind of spans the entirety of the value chain. I think maybe most helpful is to think about personalization in three different compartments. The first would be in kind of acquisition related activities and marketing, the traditional marketing related activities. And that's, you know, relevant messages all the way down the funnel, and the sort of shifting and changing of those messages based on kind of how you're interacting with them. And then there's product, and product is its own beast of personalization and can be everything from personalized pricing schemas to the way in which the core in financial services core transactions that you have with a particular product are shared back to you or reflected back to you, and tied to your particular objectives and nudges delivered along the way. And then there's relationship interactions. And that would be the third bucket. And that can be anything from seamless handoffs between channels. Sarah, I see you started here and now you're showing up in this channel, and I'm picking up right where you left off. Or it's relevant communications and interactions that are driving you to deeper engagement and or incremental purchases with the company. So it's a massive topic that covers the waterfront.
Sure. Many different dimensions. Communications, you mentioned product, you mentioned almost sequencing. Paul, you've seen a lot of different approaches from this standpoint in your career in many different types of financial services companies. How do you view the personalization topic?
Yeah, in addition to the things that Sarah points out, I think most important, it raises the water level of what enterprises need to do to be relevant to their customers, moving away from trying to use one size fits all or fairly gross segmentation, to learning iteratively what makes sense to individual customers, individual households, and gaining kind of changing the feeling of, a company that's sort of trying to push things on you, to the feeling that they're more intimate with what you in particular need. So as Sarah said, it's a huge change of orientation and a requirement to use techniques and technology very, very differently than in the past.
Right. Actually, interestingly enough, to that point, Gartner did a study not too long ago that showed brands could lose 38% of their customer base because of poor personalization efforts. And obviously that's along many different dimensions, as the both of you have mentioned. And so it is very important. And because of technology and because of a lot of innovation out there, we as consumers are experiencing a lot of great execution of personalization out there. Think about your Amazon experience, right? You're thinking about buying this. People who think about buying this are also thinking about buying that. And the recommendation engine concept spanning across many different industries that way. So consumer expectations, Paul, to your point, are raised that much more. I'm curious, Sarah, maybe we'll go to you here. Do you see opportunities here in financial services, at least to be able to do more?
It's critically important for financial service institutions to do more and to shift more in this direction. As Paul was mentioning, right, we're in a universe that is shifting away from kind of physically based, intermediated interactions that really drive relationship value. and to digital channels and digital relationship building. And so essential component to good digital relationship building and getting to relevance and trust is personalization. It is figuring out, how do I parse the digital exhaust of this person who's interacting with me in digital channels productively, or in any channel productively, to show up in ways that are more value additive to them. In financial services specifically, we have a digital sales benchmark. There's between a 7 and 10x differential in terms of the value of deposits that are brought to financial institutions that are acquired through traditional branch channels versus digital channels. And I think that gulf is, points to just the severity of the challenge and the opportunity and the height of the opportunity in financial services.
Did you say up to 7x?
7 to 10x.
Wow.
Yeah, it's huge. And, it's not just deposits. That's, huge. The other is retention. Digitally acquired accounts are, faster to run off and attrite. Digitally acquired accounts have shallower relationships with financial institutions generally. So figuring out the personalization that drives relationship value in a way that replicates what exists in relationship value in intermediated human channels is an important thing for financial services across the board to dig into.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, retail banking is maybe a good metaphor to a lot of other industries as well, where that relationship was in the past in the hands of the frontline person in banking, the person in the branch who would get to know that client and their life stage and issues they may have coming up and try to orchestrate the bank to respond to those needs. Now the branch is way less important. That frontline person has way less access to the customer. So what we're talking about today is how the whole system needs to work to try to learn that sort of understanding and then adapt the things that it does back to that household as if it was the frontline person doing that from the past.
Right. We see, we're seeing a little bit of that in the travel industry. If I were to make a comparison, people who have booked a hotel in a certain city, so the hotel brand knows that you're coming to stay at their property in that specific city, and so in the old days, if the guest wanted to find more about what to do in the locale, they would talk to the frontline, the concierge, the person at the desk. To your point, Paul, like the retail bank. But today, with all the data and the systems that are in place, the hotel brand can start talking to the guest before they even arrive at the locale about things that can be done at that locale, different restaurants, different places, different attractions, and they can do that through all the different medium, whether it be email, the mobile app, and communicate that even before they arrive. And so having that data, understanding that what they're going to be doing, when they're going to be staying, it can get very personalized down to the dates that they'll be there. So it's very similar to that. And with COVID, want to just pivot to that for a second. We've seen examples of that with COVID, even with the digital key, right, at hotels, where customers may not be as comfortable in the in-person check-in process. So the digital key provides them an option to check in without having to necessarily minimize the face-to-face contact. So understanding what people are comfortable with as well. I'm curious if Paul, Sarah, if either of you have seen similar innovation in the retail banking world as it relates to COVID related changes.
I wish I could say I've seen a ton. I mean, I think what we definitely saw in the past year was a consumer shift to digital channels overwhelmingly. And so in that shift, I think we've seen, banks and financial institutions get more savvy about the acquisition of customers digitally and doing that efficiently. But in terms of deep personalization within that, I think we're maybe starting to scratch the surface, but have a long way to go. And the same goes for, the product applications and the relationship deepening applications of personalization from my vantage point.
Yeah, and I think there's no doubt that the pandemic has accelerated adoption of digital channels, but in fact, it's pointed out sort of the existing shortcomings. For example, in retail banking, again, beyond getting a new account open, there are all the subsequent steps of onboarding and activating different features and getting that account up and running and used, which again have been largely in the hands of the human channels.
Right.
The ability to get that cross sell, which used to happen at point of sale, now happening digitally over time, it's not happening. So adoption, yes. Thinking about the full journey and how to use digital communications to replicate what happened in the past, still a lot of work to be done.
Well, that's a good setup as we dig into the next topic. So how do we get better at that, right? How does everyone get better at that in terms of becoming more personalized? And we talked about three different areas to bring it all together. One being the data aspect, making sure that you've got the right insight and data around your customers or whoever you may be reaching out to, making sure that the data is together and not in silos, and making sure you've got the proper data and making sure that it's clean and you can act upon it in a timely manner. But Sarah, it's more than just the data, right? That's only one ingredient.
It's an essential ingredient, the raw materials for sure, one of the major raw materials. The other is, I guess at its core, personalization is a test and learn activity. And so you're putting stimuli out, looking for kind of downstream responses and indicators that there's relevance at sort of a micro segment level. And so the approach to test design and the sort of volume of test design is a really critical component of driving personalization agendas productively.
And Sarah, on that front, speed and automation, have become much more important, right? I mean, to be able to get learnings, bring them back into your process and continue to test and learn. That having the infrastructure to be able to do that is also fairly important, right?
Yes, I mean, you mentioned Amazon earlier. I think what Amazon has mastered and sort of demonstrated is its constant test learn cycles in as many domains as makes sense for your particular business, and the speed with which you can drive smart test and learn cycles, the more effective your personalization over time. But it's a process of test and learn, and the speed of those cycles is critical.
Yeah. And Paul, thoughts on having the organization ready to support that?
Yeah, so investments in data and analytics and testing methodologies will not work unless the organization fundamentally changes the way it works and uses those capabilities. Everything from attacking the silo by silo thinking that may independently be going at the customer, as well as processes and even legal and compliance. We're going to talk about these, but this point that we're collectively making here is that these three circles need to come up and become more capable in conjunction with each other. And you can't succeed if you're just thinking about what MarTech to buy or what data to buy. The organization is going to need to operate very differently.
Right. Well, that's a
Perfect.
the just to Sarah, just to go back on your sort of commentary on the workflow and making sure you get the process set up right. How if you can drill in a little bit more on how to even start thinking about that here.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of one of those things where I think the impact of personalization is potentially profound from a financial perspective, and yet workflows kind of inherently limit or drive you to kind of points of diminishing return on personalization, because the workflows can be time and labor intensive. So this is sort of a picture of a traditional workflow around, I'll put personalization in air quotes, where you are looking to drive at least segment level personalization. Typically what you have to do first is define those segments, and that's analytic team time, flagging of those segments in data. Then whomever, whether it's a product person or a marketing person, will go into systems and define a message or experience or interaction on a segment basis, and we'll be looking for kind of the best interaction to send to that particular segment. So maybe some A/B testing, maybe some multivariate testing to identify the winner that's then rolled out at scale. And then maybe 2 months later, you kind of read how it does and go around the optimization cycle from there. And this same logic applies to journey interactions, as well as sort of one-off, sort of more campaign-like interactions. So I think this is the fundamental challenge: defining the segments, setting it up, setting the manually testing for winning interactions, winning messages, rolling out at scale, reading post scale, and also setting up sort of manually defined journeys in advance is very time and labor intensive, from an analyst perspective, from a marketing strategist perspective, from a creative perspective. And so I think one of the exciting things is we're at a point in time where AI and machine learning is starting to disrupt and bring new modes of operating that takes this paradigm and sort of enables companies to move much, much more quickly to rapidly test and learn. So, moving to a place where you're not pre-engineering personalization, and sort of knowing in advance sort of what you want people to do, but loading up platforms with content and stimuli that the platform can automatically test and learn, at a micro segment level. But this picture here is the sort of diminishing returns that many companies face today.
Right, and we're talking about creating the capability to iterate on this process in a rapid manner, in a manner in which almost in many cases you don't necessarily need human intervention. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think where human intervention is critical if we think about personalization as a giant test and learn exercise, defining the optimization function, right? Being very, very clear on what that is, having a test design that basically is hypothesis driven. What are the experiments that we want to run that are going to drive interactions that are going to move behavior in a way that is consistent with where we want to go for the objective function? And then loading up platforms with creative and stimuli execution that can then be automatically tested by platforms, scaled and tested by platforms. So componentization of creative components plus the automation of the test and learn cycle.
And just to wrap that up, it's obvious, Paul, it's obvious that in order to be able to execute this at scale and with the quickness that Sarah's talking about, you really need the organization ready, because at multiple points to be able to be able to execute each component and be ready to fulfill on the on the personalization promise. You need a lot of people to rally around that approach.
Yeah, and it's a re-education within the organization for sure. It feels scary, but we're cutting the cord of traditional segmentation. We're cutting the cord even of personas, and moving towards much more granular ability to get at what an individual prospect or an individual customer actually needs. And part of that also, we're starting to use the journey word here, that this is a multiple points along the relationship that accomplishes what we're calling personalization. The two go hand in hand. Is that a good lead in?
Yeah, that's it's amazing how you've been leading me into each slide. And we didn't even rehearse it that way. But Paul, you mentioned it, earlier. Sarah, you pointed out in the process, it keeps on coming up, how personalization is deployed across the customer journey. And when we talk about customer journey, we think about, as a practitioner, we think about the customer journey as, prospecting. Once you're able to successfully bring that prospect in as a new customer, you onboard and welcome the new customer. It's that first touch point, as we mentioned earlier. And then from there, you really develop the relationship, deepen the relationship, grow the relationship, and then at the end you want to make sure you make sure you're servicing and keeping the customer within the franchise and within the brand as well. And so it is a journey. So an example, from there's lots of different opportunities to bring personalization into the fold here, even in prospecting. When you're talking to someone that isn't necessarily a customer of yours, you can leverage data out there to personalize a solicitation, to personalize a product offering. So an easy example in the travel world that we do a lot here at ADARA is, we understand that, Sarah, you may be interested in family travel based on the information we have about you, and you're interested in going to a beach vacation. So we may work with someone to put a Hawaiian resort out in front of you for your next vacation after we come out of COVID here. And it's leveraging data like that and understanding what type of traveler you are, and the fact that you have a family to be able to talk to you in that way to get you to come to Hawaii. But Sarah, from a banking standpoint, kind of how do we think about personalization throughout the customer journey? I know you have some thoughts here.
I mean, there are big opportunities in each of these journey segments for the financial services industry. I think you've talked about prospecting. I think that the the opportunity there in the world of banking is very similar to what you've outlined for the travel industry. I also think that there's an opportunity for kind of matching value proposition and or proof points that really matter to specific micro segments in the acquisition phase, that sort of makes that more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the onboarding, banks, financial services tend to be sort of multi-product portfolio-like relationships. And so the early interactions are very critical. There are multiple things that you may want to be potentially engaging people with and directing them to and around. But in a digital first world, consumers are in the driver's seat in terms of how they're going and experimenting and interacting with the various things that you have to offer. And so being able to be responsive to the, tens of thousands of different paths through an early relationship is increasingly important. And I think moving past the sort of best practice journey-based, first I want you to do this, then I want you to do this, then I want you to do that, I think has tremendous potential to unlock value for financial services and retail financial services. And then on the deepening side, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, is moving beyond the next best action, which essentially is the next best. Do you want this? Do you want this?
Right.
How about this? And the sort of, from a consumer standpoint, it's not coordinated, it's not cohesive, and just feels like you're bombarding me as opposed to knowing me. And I think there is also tremendous value to be unlocked in the better orchestration of those kind of deepening interactions.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's wonderful data out there, but great technology to be able to get insight on what the next best product or next best offer would be, based upon not only what the one thing we talked about is based on what's best for the consumer versus what's best for the enterprise, right? Because that's always a balance that practitioners are trying to manage a little bit in terms of profitability, as well as growth versus what is the next best thing for the customer. And so it's definitely a challenge, but something that I think with technology and the data available, we can achieve. I know you had an example about on the deepening side, a deepening relationship side here in terms of that topic. What is it about? What is it about this area, growing that relationship with the customer? What is it about this phase of the customer lifecycle that is something that we all can do better here?
Yeah, I mean, so this is an actual picture of a consumer, in Phoenix, Arizona, and all of the communications that she received from her bank over the course of a calendar year, and the sizes of the circles are related to the volume of particular, product level, kind of next best offer, if you will, communications she received. Then the net impact. So this feels like just, do you want this? How about this? How about this? As opposed to truly knowing. And when you are Paul spoke about siloed businesses. When you're operating in silos, and everybody's incentivized to meet their unit volume numbers in a calendar year, often the right thing to do is send more. And the net impact of that from a customer perspective is less than great. And what you see on the right-hand side of this page is the response curve. So what happens when you do this is you become less, you basically train the customer that your communications are not necessarily relevant, and they become more inclined to ignore communications and interactions from you. And that then basically diminishes the CLV or LTV that you can be getting from that customer over time. So sometimes, I mean, it's basically retraining to think about what's the right next interaction. Is it a value-added emotional message or brand interaction or high five rather than sort of an offer? So
Yeah.
this is hard to tear the heroin drip of the got to make my units out of the arm, though. That is, and I think Paul has thoughts on, you know, the organizational requirements needed to step away from this kind of interaction.
I just want to reinforce what you just said, Sarah, and maybe Bernie, if you go back one slide to the journey. I think it's really important to think about this more than just ways in which the company can sell you something. And the journey now, as we get to know that client, has to include appreciation. It has to include giving you content that's relevant to you as we see how you interact with us and learn more about what seems to be important to you. So it's expanding the palette of things that become touches beyond just where can we get you to do something that has been important to us. Ultimately, it will be important to us to do well, but the relationship is a loose term. I don't think a lot of customers would say, oh, I have a relationship with that company, but we're trying to get it to the point where, like with Netflix or with Spotify, that they say, oh, these companies seem to actually sort of get me. And now, Bernie, we can go back to the slide talking about, okay, it's all cool, but how does the organization actually do this?
Well, can I something that's come up? This is true for, I think we as consumers experience this with our bank, with our credit card issuer, with our mortgage lender, but we also we experience it in the travel space as well. We have relationships with different airlines, different hotel brands. And so this picture, Sarah, really is remarkable in the sense that it's not only your communications as a brand with the customer, but the customer is also getting communications from other credit card companies, other banks, right? We have multiple relationships. I have a relationship with Fidelity, with Citi, with Amex, with B of A. And I'm getting all these communications, you know, how do we, as I look at this, you know, from your perspective, I don't think anyone's got the solution to this one, but how do you manage that, not only communication flow, but that, you know, that personalization in the sense of understanding what the holistic view of the customer and understanding how you communicate what's the right product for them, knowing that they have multiple relationships beyond what you know about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fundamental challenge, and I think for any portfolio-driven, relationship-based, you know, business where you have kind of multiple products and you're hoping to consolidate more and more of the product relationships under your roof. This is where two things I would say. One, understanding the pain points that you are best equipped to address for that particular customer, and sort of thinking about that as the tip of the spear where you outperform on sort of personalization and relevance, and then sort of have a path to expansion and growth from there. Is maybe one piece, and then the other is use case driven in terms of you're not ever going to be able to control the volume of offers and information coming from competitors. But what you can control is that when you show up for that particular customer, you're showing up for them with very relevant material and relevant content, relevant offers. And so experimenting for in engagement and ultimately LTV is the path out of that, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a challenge that we see across many different industries as well. And my comment there is also leveraging data that's available out there to be able to provide you with that holistic look of the customer. It'll vary by industry in terms of what you can get, but agree, Sarah. It's something that you have to continue to figure out, test and learn. Paul, it gets fairly complicated, but back to the support and the organization that you need to be able to approach this kind of issue. I know you had some commentary here.
I do, because this in my experience is equal to or greater in importance to making all of this work. And in my background of consumer packaged goods, it was unambiguous within the company about a client orientation, and everything revolved around that. And that was all the way back in the 1970s, just to date myself. But many other industries and financial services in particular, that's not their starting orientation. So what do we need to do differently in the way in which the company operates to get this journey orientation and personalization orientation? And the first thing is, we have tended to be optimizing kind of tactic by tactic, or even just portion of the journey by itself. So how do we optimize acquisition, or how do we optimize account opening in and of itself? And let's do all the test and learn on how to do that as best as we can. Those need to change to optimizing against journey outcomes. And for example, in retail banking, the ultimate outcome would maybe be something like, we want relationship profitability at year 3 to be above average. And so how do we look at all the things that we do along the way in the journey to head towards that and optimize or improve our performance on year 3 relationship profitability, all the way back to who are we acquiring? How do we learn about the characteristics to go disproportionately at those kind of people? So element by element moves to journey in terms of optimization as a goal. That requires product silos, and it's more than product, actually. It's channel, it's everything that contributes to customer touches need to move under one sort of air traffic control. It's Sarah's chart with all of the random things coming down to that woman who I thought it was interesting. She didn't have a face, that faceless consumer. That's not working. And so the collective set of parts of the organization that influence the touch need to sit under air traffic control. Now, your question is, well, how and who does that? And that's an interesting question, dropping to my last bullet point and then come back up. It's not all in marketing's purview. It's not all in product management's purview. It's not all in each channel's purview. So who runs that orchestration? We talked about segments. Segment management is not quite right either, because it's saying that we are predetermining a group of people and we're going to kind of air traffic control to them. I think in our experience, there are some organizations that have kind of air traffic control along each part of the journey. In other words, there are people who are in charge comprehensively of acquiring new customers, and there are others who are comprehensively in charge of activating and onboarding, and others who are deepening and retaining.
Right.
And they're all coordinating under, let's say, a chief customer officer. But it's going to take a new kind of organizational structure and roles and responsibilities to be clarified. Processes that support rapid test and learn, where every touch has to be looked at in terms of what happened before and what context is it happening in, and turn the technology loose to keep trying different things. That is a cycle that's way faster than many, many companies have operating today. So how do you do that? Including in banking, everyone's friend in compliance that is there to keep the bank from doing disproportionate things for different audiences. And that is critical, it's important, it's required, but how do you do it in respect of this very fast turnaround? And there are companies who are doing that by working with boundaries to what test and learn can do rather than modeling and time-consuming things. And then two other things: the multiple channels that touch the customers need to feel fully coordinated. The random things going on, and it's way more than just look and feel and graphics. It's the way in which you're talking feels like it's coming from one voice. And then you're going to start slow and grow. So how do you invest in technology solutions and data access that can grow with the organization rather than little modules that you keep adding along the way? Other than that, it's pretty easy.
Well, Paul, again, you're transitioning me very, very easily here. So to your point, it's quite an endeavor. But let's see if we can wrap it up and break it down for the audience here. If we just want to get started, right? If we just want to get started and we go back to the concept here, what are the simple things that a practitioner can do to just get their personalization journey started, and eventually evolve to your 6 points. But what are the simple steps that we can leave them with? And on the data front, if I just to focus on that for a second, on the data front, my recommendation is really to get your, first thing to do is make sure your own data is intact, in order. Many of you have different silos within your own organization where your data lies, right? Data with you have your prospect data, you have your customer data, you have your service and support data. Make sure that data is there to be leveraged. It's a gold mine. But it takes work to bring that all together and to leverage, so that, as Paul mentioned, that you can be talking to the customer in a cohesive and consistent manner, that it's not all segmented or modularized necessarily. Speak to the customer in a relevant manner, and it does start with making sure your own data is in-house, is in order and connected. So that'd be my advice on the data front. Sarah,
on the activation and testing front, I mean, this is one where getting clear on the use case and the sort of speed to impact and size of potential impact for an early use case can make all of the difference. I think there is a lot of experimentation around sort of marginal edges that seems like, hey, it's a good place to start, but actually hits a wall. So thinking through the use case that is going to make the case for continued stepping into personalization by the organization, and all of the sort of work flow changes that Paul was speaking about, are going to be taken up by the organization. So that is, I think, incredibly important. The other thing that I would say is, just because you can test something doesn't mean you should. And so having a very well thought through test design is a really important part of getting personalization right out of the gate. So it's that old adage of measure twice, cut once. I think very much applies in this space as you're stepping into personalization. So use case selection and really crisp test design that is testing things that you really think are going to have material impact.
Yep, makes sense. And Paul, from the organization perspective, if you're not the CEO, take it from that perspective. what is the what can the practitioner do from the organizational perspective to get going?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, from the practitioner standpoint, to break these silos and kind of operate comprehensively, they actually can't do it by themselves. So I think you can't, on the other hand, expect a big bang blow up today's organization and just turn on a switch for another one. So our advice and what we've seen is chunk it down. Can you create a smaller world, really, either a geography in which you can begin to learn how to do this cross product and channel in that geography if that's relevant to your business, or even by a portion of the journey. Onboarding, how can we comprehensively across all channels, products, et cetera, do better in activating onboarding and increasingly personalizing what we do. So chunk it down and begin to learn that way.
Right, and then scale it, as you see success, scale it from there.
Yep.
Makes sense. Well, we are at time. I want to thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Paul, for joining me in on this conversation. Want to thank the audience for attending. Hopefully, that provided some insight and clarity and how-tos on the road to personalization. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today in this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.